$5 billion. That's how much the 2016 Bitfinex hack is worth today. And up until recently, the whereabouts of the funds remained a mystery. However, a little over 2 weeks ago, a couple were arrested in connection with trying to launder the funds, and the feds made their largest financial seizure ever. This is the most unlikely of stories so far, and believe it or not, there is still a great deal that remains a mystery. That is exactly what I'll be covering today. Before we progress, there is a disclaimer that I need to stress. Don't let my affable, charming, and unflappable demeanor fool you. I am no financial advisor. Everything you see on this channel is educational, informational, and sometimes inspirational. If you're new here, then lend me your ear. Come close, come near. Okay, not that close. My name is Guy, and I'm that YouTube crypto guy. Over here on the Coin Bureau, we share the latest news, reviews, moves, and market blues too. If that sounds like something you could benefit from, then smash that subscribe button. Ping that bell as well, and YouTube will tell you when another video is ready to view. Okay, enough dilly-dallying, let's get cracking. We need to start at the beginning. So, right back on that fateful day in 2016 when Bitfinex suffered one of the biggest Bitcoin hacks on record. On the 2nd of August that year, a little under 120,000 Bitcoin were sent out of exchange wallets. At the time, these were worth $60 million, and it was the second largest hack after the Mt. Gox one back in 2014. This led to a crash in the price of Bitcoin of 20% as the market tried to digest exactly what had happened. Exactly how the hack took place is still not 100% clear. However, it appears as if there was a vulnerability in the way that Bitfinex structured its accounts and wallets. More specifically, it used a custodian called BitGo with a 2 of 3 multi-sig wallet setup. Now, for those who don't know, a multi-signature wallet usually requires a certain minimum threshold of signers to sign a transaction. With a 2 of 3 setup, any 2 of the 3 key holders are able to sign a transaction and send funds out. But they do need the minimum threshold to do this, otherwise the funds can't be sent. Now, I've talked about this in much greater detail in my video about crypto custody, which I'll leave in the description for you guys. Now, in the case of Bitfinex's setup, this was disclosed in a since removed blog post by BitGo back in 2015. Thankfully, though, we can still see what it said due to the Wayback Machine. I'll leave a link to that in the description for you. Now, according to the subtitle of the post, these were, quote, fully segregated trading accounts. Essentially, customers had complete segregation of their accounts and they were no longer commingled. So, each user could see their own individual address on the blockchain and observe the amount of Bitcoin that were in them. This was supposed to give them peace of mind by being able to observe the solvency of the exchange in real time through their wallets. These segregated accounts were multi-sig with the 3 keys that I mentioned earlier. One of the keys was held by the trader, one offline by Bitfinex, and the third held by BitGo. This was supposed to be the gold standard in crypto security, and prior to the hack taking place, the Bitfinex CFO stated, quote, with our BitGo wallet solution, it becomes impossible for our users to lose their Bitcoins due to us being hacked or stealing them. It seems as if the Bitfinex key was compromised, and given that it was a multisig, BitGo would have had to have signed it as well. However, the fact that the custodian signed off on such a large transaction, a sixth of the 30-day trading volume at the time, left many suspicious. Some thought that it may have been a problem with the multisig technology or a breach at BitGo, but the company came out and said no servers were compromised. Now, of course, someone could have gained access to private keys at the exchange or custodian without having to physically breach the systems. For example, one possible vector was a social engineering attack where they could have tricked people within the organization to give them access. Keep this in mind as it will play a part later in the video. Anywho, the funds that were taken from Bitfinex were sent to a single address, officially labeled Wallet 1CGA4S by the feds. This one address no doubt had thousands of eyes on it. Blockchain sleuths and law enforcement agencies began monitoring every single transaction leaving that wallet. Now, these transactions were eventually disentangled and traced, which would one day bring down one of the biggest money laundering schemes in history. Now, I have to admit, when I first heard about the Bitfinex hack, I thought that those coins were in the hands of a sophisticated cybercrime ring hiding out in Siberia. Or perhaps it was North Korean state actors who were looking to fund the regime's nuclear weapons program. I certainly did not expect a hippie rapper and her tech entrepreneur husband living in New York to be the people behind the wallet, but that's exactly what happened. On Tuesday last week, news broke that the US authorities had arrested the Bonnie and Clyde couple of crypto's greatest heist, Ilya Lichtenstein and Heather Morgan. They were accused of trying to launder the funds, although not the hack itself. Now, what's perhaps the most crazy about these unlikely money launderers is that despite knowing nation-states were tracking their transactions, they maintained a relatively public online life. They were both active on social media. He was a serial entrepreneur who regularly tweeted about Web3 and crypto. She was a rapper called Razzelkhan, who had a TikTok and YouTube channel and many other social media accounts besides. I'll leave a link to her music video, The Crocodile of Wall Street, in the description. Warning, it cannot be unseen. I'll also add that this aspiring rapper was a contributor to Forbes magazine and had published a number of posts. More details on that later. But believe it or not, the personality of the accused is not the most crazy part of the story. Crucially, in this case, the authorities were able to seize just under 95,000 Bitcoin, worth over $3.6 billion at the time of the seizure. The real crazy thing about this seizure is that the authorities were able to do it without even talking with the accused. That's because Lichtenstein apparently stored the private keys on a cloud drive. That's right, he kept the keys to one of the largest fortunes in crypto history on a hot wallet in the cloud. All law enforcement required in order to get hold of these files was a search warrant for the drive. There were over 2,000 addresses there, including the wallet in question. They were all encrypted, but I assume the encryption was no match for the tools in the arsenal of the DOJ. Of course, the remaining 25,000 Bitcoin that was sent out of the wallet were eventually used to track down the suspects. Now, you'd think that someone who keeps private keys on a cloud drive would be pretty easy to trace and catch. I mean, if you're making such a noobish mistake about crypto security, surely you haven't a clue about OPSEC or covering your tracks. Well, you would be surprised. That's because despite the haphazard handling of the private keys, the accused used an array of sophisticated laundering techniques that were detailed in the DOJ press statement. These included fake IDs, programs to automate transactions, peel transactions, transaction layering, using numerous exchanges for obfuscation, chain hopping, and fictitious businesses. Now, those don't look like the actions that a know-nothing noob would take. They seem calculated and systematic. So perhaps this is the reason that it took almost 6 years to find them, and perhaps it wouldn't even have happened were it not for a few misguided steps. Steps that have been carefully detailed in the statement of fact that was released by the government not long after the arrest. And boy, is that a treasure trove of information. Let's jump back in time to January of 2017. It had been almost 6 months since the hack of Bitfinex, and the coins had remained in wallet 1CGA4S. Then, all of a sudden, the coins were on the move again. They were being sent in multiple transactions and, quote, extensive layering activity that employed the peel chain technique. Now, I won't get too deep into the technicals here, but this is basically an advanced technique that will peel off an amount of Bitcoin through transaction pass-throughs that are eventually sent to exchanges. The final destination for these peel chain transactions was Alphabay. Now, for those that have never heard of it, Alphabay was the largest darknet marketplace in the world in 2017. It had proliferated ever since the feds brought down the Silk Road a few years before. Now, the reason why Lichtenstein was sending the Bitcoin to Alphabay is because he wanted to mix the coins. Essentially, Alpha Bay advertised a mixing service where you could send funds to the exchange and withdraw them after they had been commingled with all the other users. Liechtenstein hoped that by doing so, this would break the transaction linkage and hence allow the trail to go cold. He had several accounts at Alpha Bay. Liechtenstein would then send these funds out of Alpha Bay into offline wallets. These would then be further sent around using those Peel transactions and eventually land up on another exchange. Here they would be exchanged for Monero, a privacy coin, and then be sent out of the exchange as well. Now these are all labelled as Virtual Currency Exchange 1, VCE1. This was a smart move, but it of course relied on the feds not getting access to the Alpha Bay servers. And that is exactly what happened in July of 2017. The founder of Alpha Bay was arrested in Thailand and eventually ended up killing himself in a Thai jail. The authorities managed to seize the servers for the market, which were being hosted in Lithuania. This seizure of the Alpha Bay server was actually a goldmine, not only because it helped them get back on the trail of the Bitfinex Bitcoin, but also because of all the information about dealers and users on the site. I'll leave some info about the bust in the description for you to read later. As it relates to Liechtenstein, though, the investigators could study where the funds came in and where they were sent out. On the outward leg, they could then further track them, which led them, after a number of transaction hops, down a path to VCE1. Over at VCE1, there were 6 different accounts, all of which were registered with an email address from an Indian email service provider. Of course, these accounts at VCE1 were created as anonymous accounts. Given the amount of funds being sent to them and the nature of the trading, the exchange asked for additional information on a number of accounts. Given that this information was not provided, these accounts were abandoned along with the funds in them. Now, the reason that the investigators were able to draw a connection between these accounts at the VCE is because the email addresses that were created to register them had a number of commonalities. They were created with the same IP address, at around about the same time, and were all engaged in similar trading patterns. The Alpha Bay funds didn't only move to VCE1 either. They also moved to other exchanges, including ones labelled as VCE2, 3, and 4. These accounts were also registered to email addresses from the same Indian provider. Notice a pattern. On VCE2, for example, they converted Bitcoin into Dash, what the feds call chain hopping. This was done because Dash has privacy-enhancing features that the perps thought could hide their tracks. However, the feds noticed that shortly after that Dash was bought on VCE2, 2 accounts at VCE4 received Dash deposits. Circumstantial evidence, but quite telling. Following so far? I know, it's pretty crazy the lengths they went to. Now, of course, these were all anonymous accounts. The authorities had to continue following those digital breadcrumbs as the funds moved out of these exchanges. And that is where things get even more interesting. Once the funds had left VCE1, they moved through several different hops to numerous unhosted offline wallets. Of course, all these transaction hops mean nothing in the face of some powerful blockchain auditing tools. This is something that I talked about in greater detail in my video on blockchain tracking companies, and that is in the top right. So, using these tools, the agents were able to trace the funds to another exchange that they've labelled as VCE5 here. And so, the feds slapped a search warrant on the exchange. Thankfully for them, this exchange account was registered in the name of the accused, Ilya Liechtenstein. It was opened in 2015 and he used his California driver's license to register the account. The email address that he used also had his first name in it. The feds then managed to get a search warrant for the email address that was used to create the account, and it confirmed that Liechtenstein did indeed control it. They were further able to track the flow of funds from VCE1 to accounts at another 5 exchanges. These were either in the name of Liechtenstein or those of his businesses. When some of these exchanges questioned Liechtenstein about his crypto investments, he said he had, quote, been investing in and mining since 2013, so the source of funds would be those early crypto assets. Anywho, transactions from this VCE were further tracked, and according to the statement, they had been investing in other altcoins, using Bitcoin ATMs for withdrawals, as well as buying NFTs. Now, what the authorities had was a number of exchange accounts that had been verified in the names of either Liechtenstein, Morgan, or one of their numerous businesses. They needed to further prove a connection between the accounts at those exchanges that got funds from Alphabay or Bitfinex, VCEs 1, 2, 3, and 4. This was done in two ways. Firstly, they were able to trace transactions back to two accounts at VCE4 that were registered in the name of a Russian national, as well as with Russian email addresses. These accounts were funded exclusively with Monero. They then also followed funds from these accounts at VCE4 to another exchange account in the name of EndPass Inc., which is, of course, a company that the accused controls. These were some of the main connections that were listed, although there were many, many more. I won't list them all here, but I will leave a link to the entire statement of fact below. Really interesting. Connections between these accounts aside, the motherlode came when the agents got access to that cloud account that I mentioned earlier. Not only did it come with the private keys, but it also had hundreds of documents that incriminated Liechtenstein and Morgan in the scheme. These are all detailed in the documents released by the government in opposition to their detention order. The document shows that in that drive, it had spreadsheets with the login credentials to all of the anonymous exchanges and email addresses used for said exchanges. This tracked funds on these exchanges as well as which ones had been frozen or blacklisted. They also had files that contained fake IDs, stolen selfie photos, links to darknet sites that sold stolen IDs, and a whole host of other goodies. There were also many references to Ukraine and setting up operations over there. This, together with the accused's trips to Ukraine, was used as evidence by the government that the couple were planning to escape there before the hammer came down. Apart from this, the document also referred to some previous rap videos of Morgan where she rapped about phishing, a cybercrime technique. This, together with her talks on social engineering, further pointed to Morgan, aka Razzelkhan, aka the Crocodile of Wall Street, being involved in the scheme. It even revealed that at the time they searched their apartment, agents had to wrest a phone away from her as she attempted to lock it, Razzelkhan going down like a true gangster. If you have time, I encourage you to read this document as it also has pictures together with all the other evidence like burner phones, cash, hardware wallets. It's fascinating if you ask me. So that is how the couple were traced and eventually arrested. If convicted on the money laundering charges, they could face 25 years in prison. However, despite how strong the government's case appears to be against the couple, there are still many unanswered questions here. So, let's take a look at some of these, shall we? The first and perhaps biggest mystery here is if the couple are not being charged with the hack, who could be behind it? Remember that no systems were breached and the funds were supposed to be secured by a multisig. This means that someone at BitGo or Bitfinex must have authorized such a large transfer out. I should also point out that in the wake of the hack, BitGo put out a statement to all its clients that their funds should be safe because Bitfinex's BitGo setup was, quote, unique. So, this begs the question, how was it different and why? Could someone have social engineered their way into one of the organizations and got key access? This was, after all, what Morgan rapped about. Or how about the fact that Morgan wrote a blog post that was entitled, quote, Experts share tips to protect your business from cybercriminals. Funnily enough, she also interviewed an executive who worked on compliance at BitGo for the piece. Now, while that's certainly interesting, the executive in question only worked at BitGo from 2019 to 2020, so this may just have been a crazy coincidence. The point is, there is circumstantial evidence that they could have been behind it. But the fact that they've not been accused of the hack, despite all the tools and evidence at law enforcement's disposal, means that there could be someone else. Moreover, I somehow refuse to believe that this person was behind such an intricate and involved hack.
You want to do this. Okay. Why?
Know what I mean? Now, this would indeed appear to fit the profile of someone who stored private keys in a cloud drive. But the actions that the couple took to try and obfuscate and launder those funds were most definitely not the work of amateurs. That then ties into another mystery here, and that is how they could on the one hand be so amateur and on the other so professional. As detailed in the video, the techniques that they used were complex and involved methods hardened cybercriminals would employ: fake IDs, mixers, chain hopping, etc. And then, why would they have gone to all these measures to hide their tracks only to fully incriminate themselves with hundreds of documents and the actual private keys on a cloud drive, all within reach of a simple search warrant? It just doesn't add up. On top of that, you have the very nature of their online and personal lives. How could they be so confident and live so openly knowing that they had so much heat on them? I mean, in New York, of all places. She literally shot her music video a stone's throw away from the Southern District of New York's Attorney's Office, one of the Justice Department's most well-known courts. Hiding in plain sight, I suppose. He used Twitter regularly and even trolled prolific venture capitalist Mark Andreessen in a tweet about a month ago. What's even more bizarre about all of this is that according to their lawyers, they knew from one of their exchanges that law enforcement was looking through their accounts. This was in November, and not long before they were making those online posts. Now, I don't know about you, but if I knew I was facing up to 25 years in prison, I would be on a plane to Timbuktu, not on TikTok making rhymes or shitposting on Twitter. Either they were very confident, very ignorant, or very framed. Who the hell knows? Now, one final mystery, though, is what is going to happen to that seized Bitcoin. There's been no talk yet from the authorities as to whether they plan to return it to the victims. And who are the victims in this case? Is it Bitfinex or the users? Now, Bitfinex has indicated that it is in discussion with the US authorities to recover the stolen Bitcoin. However, there's one minor problem with this, and that's that Bitfinex's sister company, Tether, has been in hot water with regulators in the US in the past. Lawmakers in the US have also been taking shots at the stablecoin issuer because of its opaque operating structure. So, how willingly they'll hand over $3.5 billion in crypto to Bitfinex is unclear. On the flip side, if they do opt to give it back to the victims, this could be quite hard as well. They'll need Bitfinex's help to locate these users, and let's not forget that Bitfinex paid them back, albeit if it was only in the USD value of the loss. So, it's not immediately clear what will happen with these funds. One thing is for sure, though, this case is going to be fascinating to watch, and something tells me it could get even weirder. Now, I want to finish off with a few of my final thoughts on this case. Now, I have seen a lot of crazy stuff in crypto, but I will admit that this story caught me off guard. When I first heard the details, my mind raced with conspiracy theories. Could they have been framed? These surely can't be the masterminds of this amazingly sophisticated plot. But then again, if they were framed, surely the story would have been a bit more believable. That's the whole idea of framing someone. By a process of elimination, I eventually came to the conclusion that it is indeed true. Just a crazy story that seems as if it was made for TV. And in fact, it was recently disclosed that Netflix has bought the rights to it. They sure do move quickly, don't they? Now, one thing that does stick out for me here, though, is how effective law enforcement has become at tracing illicit funds online. Over 6 years of painstaking deconstruction, coupled with some incredibly powerful tools. Of course, they could not have done it without the blockchain. Turns out that an immutable and transparent ledger is a mighty fine feature if you want to trace transactions. Throw in a few auditing tools, and criminals would be foolish to try and launder funds with crypto. So, one thing that I would love the news media, politicians, and regulators to take away from this is that cryptocurrency is not a money launderer's friend. It's not a smart place to do illicit business or evade taxes. Therefore, the constant efforts to discredit it on these grounds are disingenuous. I would be way more concerned about the billions of dollars of trade in dirty dollars, illegal gold, and blood diamonds. You can't track all of that on a blockchain. And that's it for my video today, folks. It was a really interesting one to research, but I need your feedback. So, what do you think of the case? Do you have any of your own theories about who's behind the hack? And are you a fan of Razzelkhan's music? I'd love to know, so let me know down below. Now, come closer as I have a little secret to tell you. What you're seeing here on YouTube is but a fraction of what I share on my other social channels. Most of these are verified with blue ticks, and they include my Telegram Insider channel for daily market analysis and thoughts, my Twitter for announcements and the odd shitpost, Instagram and TikTok for behind-the-scenes views and memes, and lastly, but definitely not leastly, my weekly newsletter. It's here that I share my crypto tips as well as a breakdown of my personal portfolio. It comes only once weekly, as well as with a spam-free guarantee. The links to all of those are in my socials page below. Finally, if you found this video helpful, slap a like on it. Subscribe and ping that bell as well to make sure you never miss another one. Time's up for this crypto guy, but I'll be seeing you guys very soon. Au revoir.